From Michigan Public, this is It's Just Politics. I'm Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
We're a week away from waking up to the results of Michigan's primary elections. So where do things stand today in the state's two huge marquee races?
Those are the race for governor and a hotly contested open U.S. Senate race with big stakes at the national level.
Here to fill us in is former executive director of the Michigan Republican Party, Jason Rowe, and Andrea Bitely, former communications director of the Duggan for Governor campaign. Hi, you two.
Hello.
So let's start with the race for Senate. Andrea, where do things stand right now on the Democratic side between Congresswoman Haley Stevens and former Wayne County Health Director Abdul El-Sayed?
Well, according to polling that came out this week, it is all tied up. Mm-hmm. And that is something we have seen broadly for this entire election. This week, Glenn Gariff Group released a poll that said Haley Stevens might not be the candidate against Mike Rogers, but she would beat Mike Rogers. And it might be Abdul El-Sayed, but he can't beat Mike Rogers. So I think Michigan's Democrats have a lot of thinking to do over the next few days as to if they want to roll the dice and see if Abdul El-Sayed can actually beat Mike Rogers, or if they want to see Haley Stevens a more sure thing than Abdul El-Sayed.
Andrea, is the enthusiasm right now with Abdul El-Sayed?
It feels like the enthusiasm right now is with Abdul El-Sayed, but I'm not in everybody's living room. I'm not sitting in everybody's car or on the phone with them every day. So it feels a little bit Abdul El-Sayed-y. But then you have some conversations, especially with some of my women friends, and they are leaning more towards Stevens at this point.
Isn't there always, and this is for either of you, sort of at this point in a campaign that you're looking at volume of support, which is just, sort of this how many people are behind one candidate or the other, versus intensity of support, which speaks to how powerful the motivation to vote is?
Yeah, and I tend to focus more on the intensity at this point because I think that kind of manifests support from other sectors, and how you close in a campaign matters. I mean, we're less than a week to election day, and the energy and the organization are important. And I don't think that El-Sayed's advantages are limited to the enthusiasm. I also think that he has a superior organization for turning out the vote. Not only does he have a very robust volunteer-driven effort, but he's got UAW and other labor groups that are known for their turnout operations. There's people that are focused on Haley Stevens' advantages within the Black community. Those are stark advantages. The problem is in primaries, they are not as vote determinative as Haley Stevens voters would like them to be. I've seen some estimates that Black voters will account for 18% of the Democratic primary. But when you look at who is today's modern Democratic Party, it is college-educated, affluent white people. Those people turn out in primaries. They're going to have a disproportionate influence. And if you've watched or been to an El-Sayed rally, that is 90% college-educated, affluent white people that are in those rallies. And so I think he's got an organizational and momentum advantage going into the close.
Andrea, what do you make of Gretchen Whitmer jumping in at the last minute to endorse Haley Stevens?
She is testing out her political capital. She is trying to figure out if she can actually be the kingmaker that she thinks she is. And if it works, it will give Gretchen Whitmer a huge national ability to come in and say, I think this is the right candidate, and it will actually have legs. If she doesn't get what she wants in this Senate election, it's going to be a little bit harder for her to have that ability.
I think she's risking her political capital in this dynamic. Clearly the establishment Democratic Party is closing ranks behind Stevens because they are very concerned both about Abdul Sayed's electability, but even if he were to become a senator, he is going to be a disruptor in Washington. I think it underscores what this is about, which is the establishment versus the outsiders. And so I think you're going to see that her political capital probably isn't as much as she thinks it is. She's also done a number of things to aggravate the Democratic base, the more progressive Democrats within the base. And so I think her stock with those people is actually at a pretty low point.
I want to go back to something you said, a disruptive figure about Abdul El Sayed. Isn't that what his folks who are voting for him want, what they like about him?
It's kind of his brand.
Yeah,
It is his
absolutely.
brand.
And I think when you look at the DSA candidates around the country that have done well, I don't think Democratic voters have all become socialists all of a sudden. It's just that these DSA and DSA adjacent candidates are the ones that are the feistiest. They're the ones that are, acting the most aggressively toward Trump and toward Republicans. And I think that's where the Democratic base is, and they are looking for fighters. And I think these DSA and DSA aligned candidates are the feistier candidates in these races. And so I certainly think Haley is feisty in the pure definition of the word, but El Sayed is kind of this full throated, very aggressive, confrontational attitude that I think Democratic voters are responding to.
So, Andrea, if Abdul El Sayed wins, what does it say about the state of the Democratic Party right now, or maybe about how voters feel about politics right now?
So I think if Abdul Al-Sayed wins, it says two things. It says that the Michigan Democratic primary voters are definitely going more and more and more progressive. But I think it also says that a lot of people are in the school of thought of it's all broken anyway. It doesn't really matter who we send. And if we can send Abdul Al-Sayed and he can, flip tables, maybe we'll be better off than somebody who thinks she can get along with people. So the primary voters on the Democratic side have honestly a purity test at stake here. They are faced with a moderate-ish Haley Stevens versus the progressive Abdul El-Sayed. And if they are going to take a gamble on picking the more progressive candidate, that really takes me back to the Tea Party days of the Republican Party, which resulted in the Republican Party losing pretty much everything in Washington, and it being a lot harder for the average voter to feel connected to Democratic politics. We felt that in the Republican Party many moons ago, and I think the purity test that came along with that created the Trump dynamic. So we'll see if the Democrats are as blessed as the Republicans have been with the changing of their political party.
Jason, CNN recently said the future of the Democratic Party is center stage in Michigan in this race. I mean, the national attention has gotten breathtaking. Have you ever seen a more nationalized race in Michigan before?
No, certainly not in Michigan. I mean, I think we've seen nationalized races over the years in other states with differing dynamics,
Sure.
obviously. But I think where this is in the process and what happened that preceded it is kind of a buildup to it, with Mom Donnie winning in New York and starting this whole idea that socialists and super progressive candidates can win really started there. And then, you saw primaries in the state of New York, you saw primaries in Colorado, and you saw some primaries recently in Arizona, in which the results were not what the establishment wanted, and certainly not what even analysts expected. And now you have El Sayed, who's a very talented retail candidate. He's compelling. He is the antidote Democrats are looking for, have been looking for, that led them to Graham Plattner in Maine. And that is, trying to tap into the bro culture and get a masculine version of the Democratic Party back into the national conversation, which they have not had in a long time. I think the shtick may work for El Sayed in the primary. I don't think it translates in the general election, particularly when the contrast is Mike Rogers, who spent 14 years in Congress, has won tough elections, was the chairman of the Intel Committee. And I think, Mike's going to have a real advantage going into November if he's the nominee.
We're speaking with political consultants Jason Rowe and Andrea Bitely. Jason, let's turn to the Republican side of things in the governor's race. We have businessman Perry Johnson and Republican Congressman John James. Where do things stand right now?
Yeah, I mean, I give the advantage to John James. I think Perry Johnson showed with all of the spending that he has a ceiling. He got out of the gate quickly with some heavy spending in the spring, got up into the low 20s, and he's just kind of languished there. This is now a two-person race. He's not going to be stuck in the 20s in a two-person, but I think once undecided voters break, maybe he gets to the mid to high 30s, but I think John James runs away with it. John's problem is he doesn't have a ton of money. And so, Perry's going to dramatically outspend him here in the last week of the campaign. A lot of the or the John James money is 501c4 money and super PAC money that doesn't have the same spending impact. So he's a little bit light on the advertising, but he's got the Trump endorsement, and that's worth something. And I think all people need to know is that probably going into this primary.
So, Andrea, Donald Trump was here this week. Does John James need him physically in Michigan right now, stumping for him? I mean, there's this latest CBS News polling that shows the president has a disapproval rate of 61%.
That is not a look at the grassroots and the folks who vote in Republican primaries. Folks that vote in Republican primaries are pretty diehard pro-Trump. They are that 30% that is still in favor of what Trump is doing. So, did John James need him here this week? No, but I think it was a nice cherry on top of what will likely be a James victory. But Trump wasn't just here for John James. He was here for Mike Bouchard, who was running for James's seat. He was here for the candidates across the state of Michigan to get their Trump photo op. So he was here for a lot of candidates, not just John James. But I think every little bit of grassroots bump that John James could get was important. The Oakland County Republican Party has been a thorn in John James's side. They have actively and aggressively been supporting Perry Johnson to the point where their chairman has been very vocal on social media about not liking John James. And it's been a very inter-party fighting mess that the Republican Party is now going to have to figure out once John James wins, how they unite everybody back together after such a blistering primary, specifically in one county. And it's the county that is likely to bring some of the largest volume of Republican votes in November. Oakland County is a wealthy county that is traditionally Republican. It has been trending. So we're going to learn relatively quickly here, just under 100 days, if Oakland is going to stay that sort of reddish purple or if it's going to go full blue with voting for Jocelyn Benson over John James.
Jason, I mean, so Andrea just explained the what, but I'm also intrigued by the why there are these lingering pockets of vociferous opposition to John James, even after he's kind of been put in the catbird seat.
I don't think he's been as engaged with the party. He's been a little aloof towards the party. And I think the debate dodging early on was something that just kind of created a narrative. And even if you were not firsthand familiar with the things you were surly about, I think these are the kinds of things that at the grassroots just start to take on a life of their own, accelerated by social media. And then you take the paid and unpaid online warriors on behalf of the other candidates, and they, fan the flames of this and figure out ways to throw accelerants on this stuff. There's been a lot of rumor mongering, pretty salacious things out there that are getting traction even with the mainstream media, though for the most part, they've avoided reporting some of it. But the narratives are taking hold amongst the base. And, Perry Johnson's throwing around a lot of money. And for, some of these people, there's some financial benefit to aligning yourself with Perry. Whereas John, the culture of his operation is a little more insular. So, there's just, it's kind of the local politics friction that you see with every race.
Andrea, in the final few minutes we have, let's go to the Democratic side of things between Genesee County Sheriff Chris Swanson and Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. What are things looking like in this gubernatorial race?
This is Jocelyn Benson's, big win on primary day. There's no question in my mind that she will very handily defeat Chris Swanson, although he has run quite the race for having very little money and a very, very small operation. He is extremely passionate about running for governor, but he just does not stand a chance to win on Tuesday.
Jason, as we wrap up, the Center for Politics crystal ball moved the governor's race, the general election race, from toss-up to leans Democrat just last week. What do you make of that?
I think that's people looking at the gubernatorial race in isolation. And I think the benefit Republicans are going to have, assuming El Sayed is the nominee, is a slate of very, very progressive candidates on the Democratic side. And the contrast is going to be very advantageous. I think that for Republicans that we don't run race to race. I think we run our ticket and their ticket. Look how qualified and likable these people are, and look how far out and progressive these people are. Jocelyn Benson's never faced a well-funded Republican candidate. Garland Gilchrist has not hidden his progressivism. If it's El Sayed, that's, we've talked about that. You look at who the Republicans have chosen in all these races and who we're likely to choose on Tuesday. We got a very strong slate compared to theirs, and I think that some of these ratings for the general election will move the Republican direction after a few weeks of people absorbing that contrast.
Jason, you've said this a few times in this conversation, that these candidates running in isolation, but they're not running in isolation, that you've got Donald Trump at the top of the ticket, and he's not exactly popular right now. How do you weave those two things together?
Yeah, the thing about it is every time I see a headline, and I see them almost weekly, worst poll numbers yet for Trump, but they're always the same. It's always, somewhere between 37 and 44. He's always been unpopular. This is not new, but I think it is baked in. And I do think that the voters do separate the candidates for other offices from Trump. You can have a referendum on Trump and you can have a referendum on other offices. And so I think that's just not even as much of a factor as we historically have thought of this factor. He is an entity unlike anything we've ever seen. And I think that everybody kind of understands that every elected Republican is navigating Trump world, not necessarily, full bear hug. And I think after we get through the primaries, you're probably going to see some Republicans try to show some daylight and independence from Trump.
That is Jason Rowe, former executive director of the Michigan Republican Party, and Andrea Bitely, former communications director for Mike Duggan for governor. Thanks so much, you two.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And a reminder, Michigan Public has interviews with many, many of these candidates. If you want to hear what they're saying about the issues themselves, you can find the conversations at michiganpublic.org. And that is It's Just Politics for today. I'm Zoe Clark.
I'm Rick Pluta.
Let's talk again next week.